So if you're a Christian, you're a follower of Jesus. And it's not enough to say, well, yeah, I'm a Christian, I was baptized, and then I go along leading my life trying more or less to, keep the commandments, etc. Not enough. Fortunately for us, that's not enough, because it's so much more exciting than that. So much more challenging and so much more fulfilling than that when we realize that Jesus is calling each one of us individually. From all eternity, we've been created for this, and Jesus calls us to, whatever he calls us to. We have to have a personal relationship. We have to cultivate an ear that's open to hearing the inspirations of the Spirit and the voice of Christ in our hearts to show us, who we are, what we're called to do on that basis, what our place is in the church and the world. And maybe that's why some people aren't really enthusiastic about doing that, because that would spoil their own plans. They might have their own agenda based on their very superficial understanding of who they are and an even more superficial understanding of what they really want. And so they don't bother. But they'll never discover who they are or real happiness if that's all they do. Because we're made for this. That's who we're created to be great followers of the Lord. And we have three marvelous examples in the readings today: Isaiah, Peter, and Paul. And they show this, the lineaments, the configurations of articulation of what happens, when we do encounter the Lord. And that's the first thing. If we want to find out who we are, what our vocation is, we have an encounter. A life-changing encounter. And that was what happened with them. An encounter with the Lord, which of course comes from him. It's a gift. We can't force it or manufacture it. And it's overwhelming, which shouldn't be a big surprise. If you encounter God, that would kind of be overwhelming if it's really an encounter with God. So, for example, in the first reading from Isaiah, we have the call of Isaiah to his prophetic mission, and he has a vision of God sitting on a high and lofty throne, and it says the train of his garment filled the temple. And the fathers of the church point out that that's even the throne, even the hem of God's garment, it fills our whole being. Never mind God's whole being trying to fill our being. We'd burst, we'd explode. And it says the lintels shook. There's a vision of seraphim, six-winged seraphim, the highest angelic order in our tradition. And the house is filled with smoke, so we can't see or act or live or expect our being to survive the way it did before. Everything's turned upside down. And if it's not, we haven't really encountered God yet. And then you can see the same happening with Paul. As you know, if it's the story of his conversion, we see that he had a vision of Christ and he fell to the earth and became blind. A symbol of the fact that all that he thought he saw and knew before, he didn't anymore. He was blind. God had to open his eyes to a whole new way of seeing and acting and feeling and being, because it's God and God's mission. And then Peter, same thing. Jesus says, set out into deep water. Literally what it says is, go out into the deep, the depths of God and of your own being and of the universe. The depths where you're out of your depths, where you can't swim. Make a great catch of fish as well. But as you may know, Pope John Paul II, for the millennium, in the year 2000, he used this passage as the theme. He says, as we go into the next millennium, we need to go out into the deep. Go out of your depths. Otherwise, it's just you. It's really, you haven't been transformed or challenged or, been broken open. So that's the other part, as you can see in all three cases. If you have this overwhelming experience of God, that is going to be the basis for your life and the basis for your action or preaching or teaching or acting, your life in the world, you have to realize that you're inadequate. You're not up to it. If you're going to be preaching God and not yourselves, as Paul says to the Corinthians also, then we have to realize our own incapacity to do this. And that's what Isaiah, his reaction, oh no! I'm a man of unclean lips, living among a people of unclean lips. I'm totally not up for this. So the angelic figure comes with a burning ember to purge his lips, his unclean lips. Fathers of the church took that as a symbol of the Eucharist, by the way, purifying us. And then he's the only one of the three actually to say to God, whom shall I send? God asks, and he says, oh, here I am, send me. Now, if that happened before his vision of God and his purification with the ember, he would just be a hopeless narcissist, and his preaching would be worthless because he'd just be preaching himself. But no, he realizes how unworthy he is as a result of experiencing God. That's the first effect. Yipes, I'm not up for this. But then God makes him up for it. And that means he's going to be preaching God and not himself. So, it's not enough to, read the catechism, take seminary classes, whatever it is. You have to have an encounter. It's not enough. That's reading the catechism of step 1 out of 10 or 20, You actually have to be able to preach something beyond just the formulas. Otherwise, you're not going to be persuasive at all. And, what's more, if you do actually experience God, God's going to break open all that stuff. What you learned from your parents, your culture, your country, even your church, is not enough. You won't be up to it. It has to come from an actual experience of God which will turn your life upside down. You'll be out of your depth, and you won't be able to be up to the task of preaching God, preaching Christ. So you see the reaction also of Paul. He realized he was blind, but you hear what he said. I'm the least of the apostles. I was a persecutor. It's only the grace of God, as we just heard, that's been victorious in me. It's not me. I didn't do it. How well he learned that. He even calls himself, I don't know how it's translated here, I think one born out of season. The word is a little more shocking than that. The word that he uses, ektroma in Greek, literally means I'm a miscarriage, cast out of the womb. I've been miscarried. But now the Lord gives me new birth, and I'm able to act in his name. And of course, Peter's famous reaction here, Lord, please, I'm not up for this. I'm a sinful man. Depart from me. But Jesus doesn't let him get away with that, because he's going to transform. As you see, Peter's career took a while. Took a while for Peter really to be transformed and to depend totally on God's mercy and love. But that's what we are all called to do, to realize that we're completely inadequate for this, and then to be open to, well, as the last line of the gospel and of the hymn, the opening hymn said, leave everything you have and come and follow me. Now, it doesn't just mean leave your home or your parents or, this job that you have temporarily. It means leave your opinions, your agendas, your ideas, everything you thought you knew, everything you thought you were, leave it all behind, because you're going to be shown a whole new being, a whole new way of seeing the world, God's way, Christ's way, and it's going to turn you upside down. And you'll probably make a lot of enemies in the process, because if you start speaking things other than or even more than your family or your culture or your country or even your church, you'll probably ruffle a few feathers, as of course Paul did and Peter. But that goes with the territory. If you're really preaching God, you're going to shake up society. You're going to even shake up the church. You're certainly going to shake up your family and your friends. You're going to have yourself shaken up. But that's the only way you'll find real happiness, real fulfillment, going way beyond, out into the depths, That's the wonderful gift and challenge that we're offered. But that's what has to happen if we're going to find fulfillment for ourselves. We're going to find our true place in the world and in the church. First of all, a life-changing encounter with God, with Christ, a realization of who we are, and a readiness to be completely transformed by that. And not just once and for all, constantly going further out into the depths, day after day, month after month, year after year, being guided by God, getting an even greater and more expansive and magnificent view of who God is and who we are, and daring to preach that to the world. That's our gift, that's our calling, that's our privilege, and that's our joy. Now, continue for all eternity discovering God's infinite depths. And we're calling others to discover God's infinite depths. And if we're not leading others to God, if we're just, preaching some, silly moralism or something, it's not going to change people. It's not going to attract people. What will attract people and change people is if you're on fire with a message and an energy that comes from God directly that can excite, inspire, people to do the same for themselves, to enter into that adventure, into that discovery. So let Christ come to you and reveal himself and reveal yourself to you in the process, and then give you your calling card for the world, what you really have to offer, who you really are, and who God really is.